Okay, here we go. We've got a extra special best place to be on the internet right now webinar. We're going to let everybody roll in, do some housekeeping. We already got a bunch of people who are already chilling. Like they're waiting for you, Mike. They're like, where is the goat to tell me about SGE and what the hell I'm supposed to do with it?
I mean, I'm right here. Where they been?
There we go. Stefan's like, good evening from the Indian Ocean. We are international, folks. I mean, seriously, it's like, good
Wow.
evening to the folks in the EU and the other side of the world. Someone from Australia hit me up. Jimmy Rose is like, hey, I'm gonna have to miss this. I'm like, I am sorry, we're not like 24/7 around the clock, but good morning to the West Coasters. Thank you for joining us for lunch. For the East Coasters, Ryan's from Duluth representing. Who else is here? Say hi in the chat. Let us know if you can hear us, and we will get started shortly. I'm excited. Have you seen anything ridiculous on SGE that just makes your eyes roll recently, Mike?
I mean, SG in general makes my eyes roll.
So
like, it's not a good product yet, at least.
I was going to say, just because this whole webinar is about optimizing for SGE, we're not claiming that any of this is actually like quality stuff that you're putting out there. We've got Matthew, Tasty Placement Team of Austin represent, Frederico from Berlin. We got Tanya from Asheville. And hey, how you doing, Matthew? How you doing, everybody? I'm so excited. Hi, Brian from Kansas City. Brian, okay, so Mike and I are both Philadelphia Eagles fans, so you can stay for this webinar, but we're not going to talk football. Okay, we've got Robert from Poland, Michael from Virginia Beach. What's up, Mike? Rasa from Lithuania. I love that it's so international. So, can you tell us real quick, Mike? Last night you were doing the SEO meetup. What y'all talk about there with the late end team?
We talked about SGE. We talked about the latest updates that are still rolling out. We talked about, what do we think people are actually how's it gonna change search in general? Like as we've discussed previously, people are meeting their information needs with a variety of different things at this point. Not to say that any of them are supplanting Google, but it is changing. We're starting to fragment a lot more about where you search. So yeah, we talked about all those things, and I mostly ranted about how bad SGE is.
I mean, speaking about all that stuff, so the March core update has still not completed rolling out. So it's going to happen during this webinar. That's just how these things work. It's gonna. I mean, not that we're jumping, because your advice with any webinar, with any core updates, is like, don't do anything immediately anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of people have been impacted by this, and I feel for them, but like none of our clients have been. And so, like we had this whole roundtable discussion, and everyone is like saying this, that, and the third about the updates. And then they get to me, I'm like, wait, there's been an update? Because I'm not seeing anything.
I know it's always so interesting. Like, it always shocks me when you see the skyrocket up or skyrocket down, in any given moment, because especially when, we work with a lot of enterprises. So there's not one single blog post or one single, update that typically is going to be like, today you're generating 50% more traffic. Like,
yeah, I mean, so what I have seen across our client base is like, one of the things that we do is we segment keywords by what are called keyword or query classes. This is the idea that AJ Cohn talked about a few years ago. And it's the idea of segmenting keywords around the syntax. So as an example, let's say you've got a bunch of keywords that are like, car insurance in city, car insurance in state, like those different syntaxes. Is that the word? Anyway, segmenting your keywords by different syntax, in that way, you get a real good sense of where is the algorithmic impact happening the most. And so for certain clients, we did see some drops between March 11th and the 19th, but then they recovered immediately. And so there's obviously a lot of fluctuation that was happening, but nothing that lasted long. And so even in those cases where we see those drops, excuse me, let's say the algorithm update had finished in that time frame, I still wouldn't say do something different, because Google's a software company and they're going to roll back components of what they rolled out, see if they can get it done better. So, all the sites that, just went straight down, yes, you have a problem because you're just continuing to go down. But for anyone that experienced fluctuation during March, just wait and see, because it doesn't seem like anyone that saw the fluctuation that I'm talking about had a long-term negative impact from it.
Cool. I mean, I can't wait to talk about all this also in the context of SGE and how this will, influence search, assuming that whether it's SGE or some other variation of like LLM chatbot conversations, it's a different way to search and people will learn. Let's dive in. I think we've got everybody here. I see Dylan and Nico and Rajiv and Nasim and Lawrence. Lawrence, we're referencing one of your studies here. Excited. Melissa, what's up? Let's do it. Melissa's calling out. She sees the little name tag. Hey, Melissa. Okay. What you're all here for. This beautiful webinar that we're going to talk about how to optimize for SGE, protect and perfect your snapshot. Maybe it's a complete misnomer of protecting and perfecting your AI snapshot because this stuff is volatile. Hey, what's up from Santa Cruz? Good RX. Okay, so let's dive in. Sir?
So this is me. As you may or may not know, I am not the real estate agent for that house back there. I'm Mike King, the founder and CEO here at iPullRank. And you can follow me on all the things at iPullRank. Please do, because I'm trying to catch up with Aleda. She passed me a while ago, and I got to get it together.
Dude, if this is Mario Kart, Aleda like lapped you, you know? Speaking of which, Mike kicked my butt in Mario Kart last time we played as a company, but I'm going to catch up there. My name is Garrett Sussman. That is me in a nice baseball shirt, and that's my daughter. My wife's side of the family has the purple circle face genetics. That's where my daughter gets it from. So we're from iPullRank. We do a little thing about this SEO, this content, this generative AI. We are not anti-AI. We are actually all in. Mike, what do you want to say to the good people about your wonderful agency?
We're the best. If you need SEO help, you know who to call.
There you go. Core updates, algorithms, migrations. Don't mess up your migrations, people, please. Anything generative AI, you know where to find us at iPullRank.com. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Ray. Everyone's coming in. Okay. People are ignoring SGE, and it's going to bite them. We're here to help. I'm sorry, if you think we're alarmists, but like a lot of people are like, it's not coming, it's not coming. It's coming.
Oh, it's coming.
It's coming. We're going to dive in. So Google's SGE gamble. When is it coming? Okay, so we've heard speculation here or there that maybe there's a rollout in IO. Mike has other perspectives. Mike, I'll just say what you feel comfortable saying.
Yeah, I think it's going to be before IO. I'll just leave it at that. I mean, the reality is that they've done this rollout to a subset of users. Google only does that because they want to collect more information and further refine things. And the expectation is that it's going to be sooner than IO. They're going to want to get it, tested for the bigger set of users before then and make it more widely available. I think IO will be more about broadly what is Google doing and then what other things are going to be incorporated into what SGE is going to look like moving forward.
Because remember, they launched the experiment last summer, probably before they wanted to. They demonstrated a little in IO. They technically ended the experiment in December. We have actually started to see it in the wild a couple weeks ago. We started to see tests. And Google says, it's like the users love it. They freaking love SGE.
Yeah, they love it so much, as you can see here. Someone saying, does anyone know how to turn it off? It's annoying and often wrong. You've seen that people are saying that they're getting inaccurate information. And I think that is the big issue here because people have expected Google to give them things that they can trust. And SGE does not do that regularly. So I think the reality is that they just need to get better with this. And, right now it's just not that good.
Right. And to that point, Kevin in the chat asks, like, if we think SGE will be in the EU. There's a lot of GDPR privacy stuff that Google will have to contend with that makes it really difficult to do that without leveraging massive fines. Obviously, we heard last year about Italy and ChatGPT, and Italy was like, no, and then they ultimately brought it back. I'm skeptical about how long it would last in the EU, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a GDPR consideration, but the EU is doing a lot around AI and what you can use to train things and so on. And so they may make it so Google just frankly can't do this. But at the same time, all this content is coming from their index anyway, so it's hard to say. I suspect that whatever the EU might do, Google's going to try and fight from a legal perspective, because that's going to be a pretty poor precedent for generative AI in general. So I think that it's not going to be like a easy thing for them to roll out in the EU, but I think they will ultimately figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, countries to country, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, Japan's like, yeah, do whatever when it comes to anything AI. EU is the opposite end, and the US is like, once we get the octogenarians out of the government, because how can you govern what you have no idea? Anyway, that's not fair. Sundar's all in. Mike, you've seen a lot of what he's been saying. What's your perspective on the high brass?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sundar has to make a move. I think this is more about stock price and not letting people feel like Microsoft is gaining too much ground, that they have to get into it and they have to have a product that's considered the best product for this thing, right? I think there's a lot of concern that ChatGPT is on their heels and so on. The data doesn't indicate that, but public perception does. And Google mostly has to contend with public perception. Even when we're talking about search quality in general, search quality is just someone's perspective on how good you think the search engine is. And so to that end, they often will have to do things like Penguin Panda, helpful content update to show that they are doing something to improve search quality, so that the public perception, the things that are being said in the media, die down a bit, because that's their biggest problem, right? Like, they don't want to go the way of Alta Vista, where people are just like, oh, this is not a good search engine, there's something else. So that is really what he's trying to combat. It's not necessarily that Google has gotten worse, although we've got plenty of people who are saying that it is, but really it's still a very, very good search engine, And so he has to do something to make it seem like they still have motion in that direction of being the best thing out there.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I mean, when it comes to the perception, that's all that matters. There has been like mini PR tours, quotes here and there, doing all sorts of speaking engagements. And so they're ramping up that PR machine. And even if you've seen in the latest numbers that like Bing has gained 2% of market share of search engine traffic, that 2% is billions of dollars. I mean, that matters, even though it's minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, month ago, they moved Liz Reed into the head of search. She's been very involved, all in SGE, running that product. She was at I/O last year, demonstrating it. She knows the ins and outs. It is very kind of like reading the tea leaves, how much they need this product to work, whether it's a PR move or ultimately a quality move. She even said it in her LinkedIn announcement. So everything says that AI is coming, whether you believe it or not. So let's get into SGE. For those of you who have not actually played around with it, first off, depending on your queries, there are three main types. We'll get into them: informational, shopping, local, but you'll see various different content types. It covers a bunch of different types of queries. Initially, they said they were going to hold off on your money, your life, financial, healthcare, all that sort of stuff. That's not the case. We see it pretty much across the board. So you'll see paragraphs, sometimes with images, sometimes not. You'll see bullet lists. You'll see these breakouts, which are not technically bullets, but little sentence or two breaking down a list. Images, videos, a range of different content types, and it's appearing more and more. They're switching it up. The other big question that we'll dive into with a lot of our research is, when does SGE trigger? There are 5 different scenarios, and actually initially most of them were automatic. It would just show up. Other ones you had to click to generate. Others are a truncated version where it doesn't want to go all the way down the fold from the get-go. I'm seeing more and more of the truncated version at this point. I was looking a bunch yesterday. I don't see any, and this is anecdotal, this isn't at scale, but I'm not seeing any fully automatically generated versions of SGE, which is Google just kind of realizing that people don't like they want to turn it off. They don't want that to be the only option. And then there are some situations where SGE does not show up at all. Anything that's racy, political, you really don't see it. Even branded searches, you'll see like for an actual brand, you won't see SGE as much anymore. And I do want to point out, Google is always testing. Initially, when it was first rolled out, we saw like this bear claw, and the way that they were sourcing citations was not easy at all to discover. You couldn't see where a specific part of content came from a specific specific publisher or source, and everyone in the industry kind of freaked out. And very quickly, we started seeing kind of footnote citation, like similar to what you see with Copilot on Bing. We've seen highlighted text that's related to the specific query, similar to what they're doing with featured snippets. We're seeing kind of new versions of e-commerce where you'll see in SGE, like within the actual interface, tabs and navigational pills. They were briefly testing out favicons as the source links. Those have gone away. They've even removed the carousel altogether. That was originally in the top right. That still exists for local and e-commerce, but I'm seeing it less and less for informational searches, which is problematic because that's another way for Google to drive traffic to our sites.
Yep.
Quickly want to touch on brand consideration. So what's interesting is, despite the fact that you don't see it for major brands like the actual brand name, you'll see it for any query related to a brand. So not only do you see specific links, but you'll actually see if someone reports on a study, they'll mention the brand in the study. It's a way to show up. It's a way to get visibility, even if it's not driving the link. In this example, shows how USA Today references a scientific study done by Wallet Hub, but then SGE doesn't reference Wallet Hub. So it's always tricky to navigate how you're showing up on this. But you still, like, reputation has never been more important, because even though it doesn't show up for Home Depot, someone might ask a question about the ethics of Home Depot, and you'll get an SGE for that. And that's something your SEO team needs to pay attention to. So it's not just unbranded keywords. You need to pay attention to the actual content across all of your branded keywords and whatever they potentially, think people also ask, when those show up and they're branded, they can be very biased sometimes. Like for a while, if you typed in Nike, it would say something about Nike and sweatshops. It still happens. So you need to monitor that. Mike, anything you want to speak to when it comes to brand?
I mean, I think what people need to recognize is that search is also a branding channel. And so even when featured snippets rolled out, a lot of the bigger brands that we work with were like so bullish on those, because even if it didn't yield them more traffic, they wanted to be there for those queries. So like if you're thinking about like an unbranded term and your brand is mentioned there, or your brand is where the feature snippet is pulling the content from, that keeps your brand top of mind for that user. So don't just think of search as a performance channel. It's also a place that we need to be visible in, just so you can be in that consideration set.
Exactly. And we'll talk about diving into the e-commerce, like the listicles and showing up on other people's content matters there as well. So shopping results are really interesting to pay attention to. It's really tricky because they pull primarily from Google Shopping Graph, best of lists, actual different websites, and then any information Google has. A few different layouts. We'll see like this list form of one product at a time with like a little blurb at the top. We'll see grids in SGE e-commerce shopping results. And then we'll see like they're doing this new collection version recently, which is interesting. It's like categorized by, thrifty shopping or by a brand that sells it. And then you'll see 3 or 4, different products within there. From my experience, there's no clear ranking criteria. There's so many products, for these general searches, and they don't necessarily match the shopping or even the organic results that are not SGE. It's been very difficult to figure out why a certain product would rank when there's a bunch to choose from. Real quick, I do want to talk about, for those of you who aren't familiar with the shopping graph, really great article by Olaf Kopp, just talking about where Google gets these sources from, whether it's everything you can think of, like YouTube videos, the manufacturer website, online shops and product detail pages, Google Merchant Center, product tests, product reviews. E-commerce has never been harder because, especially if you're like selling across various retailers, there's so much information you have to keep track of to, be on top of your products, especially in the context of how SGE rolls out and showing up there. So, what you'll also see is there's an interactive component similar to the shopping tab, where if you click on a product, then you'll start to see all sorts of content specifically from that shopping graph. So you'll see your images, you'll see product descriptions, you'll see places to buy, you'll see online reviews, specific shopping information, free shipping, that sort of stuff, everything that you can get in there through the merchant feed or structured data. Forum threads, like if there is a Reddit thread about your product, chances are it'll show up in the SGE results. I know how we all love Reddit these days and its impact on our SEO. And then really annoying, everyone hates this, but at the bottom there is competitor options. So they'll show, despite them clicking on your product, they'll be like, oh, here's 6 other products you might like. Good luck. Local SGE, this is really interesting. So it primarily pulls from Google Maps, but I've seen that less and less in pulling from directory sites and specific websites. So the Yelps and the TripAdvisors, and it'll just pull those from a list. It has the carousel at the top, but if you just see the drop down, like at first when this was experimenting, I was seeing a ton of just, oh, here's your Google Maps listing. It's the best option. Less and less the case. And I was looking at urban, environments. You'd think like as you get more rural, there would be less content, but Yelp and TripAdvisor kind of have everything mapped, at least in the US. So local, you really do need to make sure that you have a presence on all these directory sites. Okay, your show, Mr. Mike.
Okay, so the technology behind how SGE works is called retrieval augmented generation. And that's basically the combination of a language model with a search engine. And so the way it works is your query is performing the search, and then a series of documents are returned, and then those are fed to the language model to then generate a response. However, it's not just the full document, it is the passages in the document. So I don't know if y'all remember, but a few years ago, Google announced this idea called passage ranking, which is where they could really score down to the sentence in a document and figure out like what's the most relevant component to the query. So we all believe that, or the market believes that Google rolling out SGE is a reaction to Bing, but actually Google had come up with their own version of this back in 2021. So retrieval augmented generation was a concept that was developed by the Facebook AI research team, but Google's version of this is called Realm. So retrieval augmented language models with pre-training or whatever. And so the idea for Realm was basically that they could identify data points to complete or answer questions effectively. And so using what's called a neural retriever, they identify it, send it back to the knowledge encoder to then generate the copy. So that was Google's first version of this. And then they came out with something called Retro. Retro came from a team called DeepMind, which is, has been folded into the Google Brain team. So it's basically this big AI team at Google. And so they came up with Retro, which is the retrieval enhanced transformer, which really leverages that transformer architecture and then again combines documents that are retrieved from a search engine. Google took that further using something called RAR. So it's retrofit attribution using research and revision. And again, using a document corpus or a index, basically, getting the results and then feeding components of those results to a language model to then give you the response. So these are all the different innovations that Google used. They combined that with the Palm 2 language model and also something else called MUM. And that's the structure of how they're able to generate these results. If you want to learn more about this stuff, there's all the papers are available publicly. You can get great detail on how it works. So Realm, Retro, and RAR all directly available. But then there's also a patent that was released a few months ago that talk about in great detail how does, what's called a generative summaries for search results, how does that work? And I just want to highlight some key components here. One, the system design, they talk specifically about how, there's this language model with a variety of different components to it that select from what are called SRDs or search result documents. And then they determine which of their language models that they're going to use because they've got a variety of them to choose from. And then based on that, they generate the response. So on the next slide right here, we're showing how it works through it. So it gets the query, it figures out which documents it want to use based on that query specifically. But then there's a bunch of other documents it may consider based on like implicit relationships in that subset from the documents that it got. And then it selects from those, feeds it to the language model, and generates the response. Another thing that's really interesting here is that it learns what documents you may have already seen or what information are you already aware of to then personalize what that response looks like. So this is part of why there's such variability in what you see in these results. You can have a very different result on your machine if you've clicked on 2 or 3 different results in the SERP, then I'll see based on what I've clicked in the SERP as well.
Which makes things really hard for SEOs. We'll get there eventually, but just imagine like how personalization is going to make things that much more complex.
Yeah. So how is that ultimately going to change things? And I see Brendan said it sounds expensive. Absolutely, it's expensive. One of the things that Google really orients itself around for the core search engine is this idea of the cost per query. And the cost per query is going to go up dramatically using something like this. But some of the implications here are that, it's going to change the search demand curve. So we're talking about this section pushing down the core 10 blue links or 100 blue links or whatever it is, almost below the fold, in some cases completely below the fold. And so the click-through rate model is going to change for those core results, and also the click-through rate within the AI snapshot is going to vary as well because the number of citations will be different for every response. And then rank tracking is going to be far more complex. So someone mentioned that AWR is already doing rank tracking for SGE, which is great, but that's going to bring their costs up dramatically because the way that rank tracking currently works is you can do it based on the server-side rendered version of Google. But with SGE, you have to client-side render the Google results, and then you've got to click on the result to open up and get what the response is going to be. And so in those cases where that happens, it takes a long time for that to render, like the actual SGE result to render. And there's a lot of variability on what that time looks like. But the bottom line is that we're going from milliseconds to load the SERP to tens of seconds to load the SERP. And rank tracking is a function of how long is that computer running. And so the price for or the cost for rank tracking to be done is going to go up exponentially. And who's going to pay for that? You.
And to that point, it's interesting because I've heard rumbles about this idea that maybe Google will be caching some of the answers, like the most popular, more common ones. That seems like a way they would try to cut down costs at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a question just popped up from Matthew. He said, oh, so it's just summarizing the SERP? That's lame. So it's not just summarizing the SERP. It's actually taking components from pages that rank in the SERP to answer your question. So it's a bit more complex than that. Another thing that's going to change is that the context windows that are created with the subsequent questions, so you can have the follow-up questions, it's going to make the responses even more personalized. And so what we just talked about is this idea of having personalized AI snapshots based on what you've clicked before, what Google knows that you've looked at before, but that becomes increasingly more personalized as you do a follow-up question. So as someone that's optimizing to appear in this web of questions that you see, needs to inform what you're creating in your content, because otherwise you'll quickly fall out of the consideration set if your page doesn't answer a series of these questions. So we do something that we call the SGE threat report, and we've been doing a lot of research around SGE since Google first announced it. And one of the things that I did a few months ago was I scraped the results for 91,000 keywords just to see where things were going. And of course, the SGE has changed a lot since I did that, and we've got another study coming very soon, but it's still worthwhile to understand what's happening. And so with our threat reports, we actually are modeling based on some information that we already know to be true. So based on what happened when we rolled out when they rolled out featured snippets, there's some data points that we pulled, but we also pulled some data that we found based on how long does it take for a user to actually click their first search result. So 50% of users click one in the first 9 seconds, but the average time spent before they actually click on the first result is almost 15 seconds. And so that informs what our model looks like. But also, when I first did this analysis, we saw that the average AI snapshot was taking a little over 6 seconds to load. And so just pulling all the data that we've got, excuse me, since we started collecting all this data for our SGE reports, excuse me, we're seeing that the average is now 5.81 seconds, so a little less. And, it goes up and down based on the different verticals that we're in, what the query looks like, and so on. But we're seeing that the trend is, just a little higher on average. But we also know that the featured snippets, based on the analysis that was done pre and post with that, took 35.1% of the clicks, right? And so combining that data, we effectively built out a model to indicate how much traffic could be lost based on these different factors. So how long does it take for them to load? What position are you in? Are you appearing in the AI snapshot? Are you in the citations? Things like that. And so we also look to see, what the snapshot distribution looked like based on the page type. So informational queries versus local versus shopping. And they're still mostly informational for us based on the data set that we looked at. And then we also look to see like how often is the actual snapshot appearing. 40%. Some cases there are the generate button. Some cases there's just no snapshot at all. And so we're basically seeing like 40% of the keywords that we looked at had an AI snapshot. And then that also varies by category. So segmenting all the different keywords that we've got into the different keyword categories. So like entertainment and sports, so on and so forth. And as you would imagine, the queries where you have richer media tend to take longer in generating the AI snapshot because the pages that Google is pulling from tend to be far more robust. And so to the point of, are they just, taking the results and summarizing them? Then you want to figure out, well, which pages or which position usually shows up there. And so we're seeing positions 1, 2, and 9 appear the most. But again, as we've done this analysis over time, it isn't just 1, 2, and 9. You don't have to be in the top 10 at all. You can be, on pages 10 and 9 and what have you, because it's more about relevance for this than the other signals like length and so on. And so AI snapshots, they most often use 6 different results. And again, because they're not using the full page, they're looking for the most relevant passage. It makes sense that they're going to use a variety of different results in order to compose that, because they want to also verify and validate what they're seeing in multiple places. And then based on the industry or the vertical, we're seeing that, more results are being auto-triggered than in others. So as an example here, we're seeing for automotive, far less are being auto-triggered. Whereas when you look at banking, you're getting a lot more that are being auto-triggered. So it's really important that you're segmenting all this data out and seeing what's going on in the different spaces, because there's just a lot of variance across different queries.
And so to call out, I mean, one of the things is there's been a lot of other studies done in the industry. Lawrence O'Toole, who's of Authoritas, is in here now. His team ran a couple of really great studies. Worth calling out, though, there are billions of queries that happen like every single day. And so whenever we're looking at these studies, whether it's something that we're doing, Authoritas or SEMrush or anyone, always we need to have our kind of like critical thinking cap on in terms of, correlation studies and then also just sample size to be able to come to any really strong conclusions. That said, I think a lot of these studies do a great job of kind of giving us a guiding direction, like a leading perspective on what we're seeing. And so, and to Mike's point, everything's so volatile, everything's changing. So I put some dates with a couple of more relevant ones, but Authoritas did one in January, 1,000 keywords. It was interesting that he found 93% of generative links came from sources outside the top ranking organic domain. So that was different. And I've seen some of this on both sides. I've seen, and this is an opportunity for you, if you're not ranking for certain keywords, you can still show up in the search generative experience in the AI snapshot, which is a great opportunity if there are major players. If Forbes is dominating, the SERPs for every ridiculous, stupid query that they've earned because they have a big brand, recognizable brand. But SGE is an opportunity for smaller websites to jump in there and get some visibility. They did a second study in March with a few more keywords and found that search generative element for 91% of all search queries, which so across the board, we're going to get a little more into the actual SGE threat report and something to pay attention to. Mike's going to do a walkthrough of that, but it's a consideration that wherever SGE appears, that's going to influence that click-through rate and your opportunity through your normal, organic SERPs. Then finally, a recent one, which has a large sample size, which I highly recommend you check out, is one done by Search Engine Ranking. This was Yevgenia Krovmova, and they did 100,000. They looked at a bunch of different factors, which I thought was really fascinating. Whether the snippet links link to one or more domains from the top 10 we talked about, but also they analyzed keywords that either have an SGE answer or generate button. And then they were the only one I've seen so far that identified whether ads were present. To this point, we have not seen ads appear inside the AI snapshot. However, we've seen a lot of conversations from Google that at some point, like even their in theory, their ads team and their search team aren't related. They're doing two separate things. The DOJ lawsuit against Google has proven that's not the case. They definitely interact and try to influence each other. But at some point, they're promoting the idea of putting ads inside the snapshot that are going to be more relevant to users. So in my opinion, it's not an if, but when. There's recently the Financial Times reported that there's the potential that Google might roll out SGE as a premium feature. That's probably unlikely, but that's a possibility that if they want to keep it ad-free, they might actually make people pay for it, but that would completely go against Google's business model. So anyone's guess in that respect. Mike, do you have any thoughts about whether or not that would actually happen?
I don't think anyone's going to pay for search. I mean, we just saw that not work for Neva. So yeah, I don't think that's realistic. So just to close the loop on this, we've got a new study we're working on right now with the team over at SEMrush. We're going to do a lot of correlation data so we can see like what sort of impacts directly or more definitively, what's going to get you into the SGE stuff and so on. So look for that very, very soon.
And so finally, let's get to this big SGE report. I got a couple of snapshots. Been looking at a bunch of these across everyone who signed up. We'll have the link at the end, but if you still want to get an SGE threat report for your own keywords and your own results, whether through Google Search Console or SEMrush is currently the data source that we're using, you can get a sense of how much you might be impacted. And so these are individual samples. So I'm not saying that financial only has a 27% risk or that SaaS is screwed because they have a 95% threat rating. These are individual companies, but I pulled these out, and it's very interesting to see the potential impact if SGE shows up, how much traffic could potentially be taken from you. Because as Mike showed in the click-through rates, if you're not 1, you're 0. No, that's not the case. But like, as you move further down the organic rankings, you're really seeing a significant decrease in potential search traffic, and SGE is going to hit that even more. So at this point, I'm going to flip over to Mike, give a screen share, and he can walk you through what the SGE threat report offers.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is we take the keywords that are driving traffic for your site, like the ones that you actually care about. We're not just going to take your full like rankings list. We take the ones that actually are driving traffic. So in this case, we're looking at travelandleisure.com. We're projecting an aggregate traffic loss of about 4.6 million. We looked at 46,000 keywords for them. And so the threat rating for them is very high. It's like 95%, right? And the reason why the methodology on how we get here, I talked about a bit earlier, how we model it based on, how fast do they load, do you appear, things like that, right? So they can also see at a high level, are AI snapshots showing up? What types of snapshots? In this case, it's almost all informational. And so then you have the load times for all these keywords. So in this case, most of their queries are showing AI snapshots in less than a second. And that's why their threat rating is so high. Like that's the biggest measure. It doesn't have a snapshot and how fast does it load. And so then we see how often they're being, their domain is featured in there, how many top 10 rankings they're showing up for. And then we have individually on the keyword level, what's going on? What does the traffic loss look like? What sort of snapshot is it? Are they mentioned in the snapshot? And then you can also download this data as well if you want to play with it. And so we also have the capability of giving all the data behind it. We've got the SERPs and so on. And this is all stuff that we're doing for free for our clients. So yeah, feel free, or not just clients, like anyone that wants one. I think it's really valuable for you to understand what the threat level is looking like for you. And also you can prepare in advance to be strategic about it. And so there's really two approaches here, right? Well, three approaches. One, you can do nothing and lose. Two, you can figure out which keywords that there are AI snapshots for that you want to continue to go after. So, we're going to talk about this in more detail after this, like how do you actually appear in the snapshot? So in those cases, like, yes, we want to continue to go after those keywords, but it's difficult, right? Like, and there's no guarantee that you get in those slots. So in those cases, you can then identify, well, here are keywords that are not showing an AI snapshot. Let's go after those more strongly, and then we can rank for those keywords and offset the losses that we may get for those that are given the AI snapshots. That's it.
Yeah, and to call out, Ryan asks why it has no snapshot generate button. I believe that one says that it's automatic. It's implying, as opposed to that there's no snapshot at all. And so that's why the threat level would probably be so high, is because there is like a 90 whatever percent that's showing up. So if you guys are interested in any sort of like more extensive SGE preparation, we have both like proactive plans and defensive plans and ways that you can put this into your SEO strategy. So you can always hit us up, iPullRank.com/contact, and we can have a conversation. Mike will sit down with you to kind of plan something out, especially for enterprises where you're dealing at serious volume and scale.
Yeah. So there's a question in here asking our data source for the threat report. We do not use an API. We are getting that data ourselves.
Boom, there you go. The proprietary secret sauce, if you will. Okay, so optimizing for SGE. I did a bunch of experiments, and as I've been kind of calling out, the volatility of these are so different from day to day, week to week, month to month. I did a couple snapshots where I was like initially doing these experiments back in January, and over the course of 5 days, you saw pretty significant changes in content. And then you see it, basically last week I took another snapshot, and it's a completely different looking snapshot. So a lot of this we need to consider as SEOs is it's ongoing. To Mike's point about personalization, about different experiences, about new fresh content coming up every day. it's not going to be easy, and I'm not going to pretend that this is anything that you can like set it and let it and you're good to go. I think, and we'll get to in terms of, you know, what ultimately how you approach it, you need to consider what your most important valuable keywords are, where you either get the most traffic or, more importantly, what drives the most revenue. And that journey, like that, as Mike showed with the different, like people also ask, or the different, you know, journey keywords, thinking about where they go from start to finish and how that's affected by SGE.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight that blocking large language models is a mistake. Like I said before, branding is a consideration that you need to maintain. And so if you suddenly are not appearing in things like ChatGPT or SGE or Bing Chat because you've blocked an LLM, you are missing out on opportunities for people to discover your brand as a function of the questions that they're asking.
And to that point, even though this webinar is specifically about SGE, all of these recommendations apply to all the LLMs as long as you're not blocking them, because there have been an interesting study that we'll get to. But, you know, whether or not Google ultimately wins this arms race of, you know, AI in search is going to be a channel, a platform for people to seek information. And so, you know, as many baskets, as many eggs, as many baskets as you can distribute, that's always the best plan. Even though we, you know, we're about SEO, you can't always 100% depend on SEO.
Yeah, another thing you want to do is embrace structured data. And the reason why is because structured data is the missing piece for large language models. It's a good way to help them not hallucinate. It's a good way to have, you know, a direct relationship between an entity and its property. And so large language models use everything from structured data. Historically in SEO, we're just like, oh yeah, you know, let's get the star rating, let's get the how-to markup and yada yada yada. It is a mistake to not use all of the schema vocabulary at this point, because it's just a good way to definitively give information and its relationship to a large language model, and it's going to use it in a variety of ways.
And to that point, shout out to WordLift and Schema app. There are a bunch of really great tools out there to help not only take advantage of like the stuff that Google's like, oh, you know, get your product structured data up there, but all this also the semantic structured data, you know, to build those relationships and build those knowledge graphs within your own content.
Mm-hmm. And so I just want to talk about real quick, like how you can understand the components of the content that's being used by a large language model, or excuse me, by SGE to build its response. So here's an example for the query BMW i8. And so each of these citations, and then also the actual carousel, which no longer exists, but in this example was firing. If you were to click on that, it takes you to specifically the passage that's being used from the page. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of that, what Cindy Crum calls a fraggle, which is a fragment plus a handle, which is identified in the page when you click on it by using what's called scroll to text. So scroll to text specifically is the component that's appended to the end of the URL, where you can specify which copy on the page you want to highlight. And so you can actually scrape these using this code on the right here that I wrote, where you can provide that list of URLs from the SGE snapshot and then quickly grab the text so you can use it for analysis. And so for SGE, it's really about the relevance far more than any of the other factors that we talk about in SEO, because the retrieval aspect is completely driven by that. It's not necessarily driven by those other rankings factors. So when we do cosine similarity by, you know, vectorizing the passages that are in the scroll to text and then compare it against what's in the actual snapshot, there is a high, almost linear relationship between the two. So my whole point here is that the more relevant your copy is that Google sees, it's more likely to select that passage and then use it for generating that snapshot.
And to that point, that's where these opportunities come up, is where, because it's so high in relevance and doesn't depend as much on authority and links and all those other trust signals, and probably why we're seeing a lot of garbage in the SERPs to some extent as well, which may or may not change, that can inform our strategy for optimizing, right?
Yep.
So when it comes to going through and preparing your SEO team and your content team to optimize, there's a few different steps that we're going to walk through. First, you're going to make sure that you're going to select your test keyword clusters, especially if you're working at scale. We know, you can't do it all at once. So identify that core cluster, that core journey, that, from the beginning touch point, the basic top of the funnel question all the way down to the end, and be able to, look at what results you're getting, test it out, see if you appear, see what is appearing. A lot of this really is reverse engineering. So you're going to analyze the SGE output and the citations. You're going to build out your optimized content that's quantitatively relevant, to Mike's point, making sure that it has that mathematical quantitative score for your actual fraggles, for your passages, that matches what the query is. Experiment with a couple of different specific types that an academic paper shows will help you show up, like expert quotes, statistics, unique content. We'll talk about information gain briefly, and then monitor and update. So in terms of identifying your cluster, there are a bunch of tools you can use to do that. Ahrefs has a cool clustering tool, also asked by the team at Candor. Has a really cool way to basically pull all the people, also ask questions for a range of queries, and then using the actual follow-up driven keyword clusters. This is more of a manual process, but Mike's written about this in the past, but the follow-up keywords or queries that show up on SGE are actually different than people also ask. So that's another source of your queries as part of that journey that Google and SGE are identifying that are important to your audience. You want to identify the formats, right? So in terms of reverse engineering, we said, there are paragraphs, there are breakouts, there are bullet lists, there are images. Make sure those are in your content if that's what Google is pulling, if SGE is pulling. If you see a bulleted list, make sure you have a bullet list. That isn't always that exact format. Like sometimes you'll see the bullet list is pulled by headings throughout your content. So go into the fraggles, because one thing that's interesting is when you click on those citations, you'll see that passage ranking. You'll see where those specific headings are pulled from, because a lot of times, despite a little jujitsu, it's kind of plagiarism still from time to time when you're looking at the content it's pulling from. Like, it's not word for word, but it's pretty damn close. You can figure it out. Then you want to test for the overall relevance. We have a really awesome tool that Mike built called OrbitWise, which uses cosine similarity, which basically looks at the entire content on your page, tests it against a specific keyword, vectorizes the embeddings and identifies, specifically a score, a relevancy score, and then you can compare it to the top 10 results. So you can see mathematically if your content is relevant to to the actual queries that you're targeting. Now, there's a really cool free tool that Market Brew has created called the SGE Visualizer that allows you to do this at a passage level. What you can do is go over to SGE Visualizer. There's a link here. And for anyone who's concerned, we'll send out the deck after this with the links to all of these so you can go and play with it yourself. But you put in your page URL, you put in the keyword, and then you can look passage by passage if a specific passage it has what they call a similarity score for what you're targeting. And that's the best way to identify whether your content is going to be relevant enough for SGE. And that's the experiments that I really tested on iPullRank and found some interesting results. For instance, I did this robots.txt file for an article that we wrote. There were 3 paragraphs. I put in a paragraph, I put in some bulleted lists, and then ultimately I was unable to get the main query for robot.txt, but I did show up mere days later for a few other follow-up queries. And so ultimately I checked the similarity score with the SGE visualizer, and then in the follow-up query, I was able to get us in there literally a day or 2 later. At this point, since I haven't continued optimizing, it's since fallen from that result. And that kind of speaks to this idea that these are volatile. For your most important queries, it's worth setting yourself, alerts to check back in and that you're still showing up. And if you're not, what has replaced you? A second one I did for this media organization examples. Now I've tried across, high competition keywords and lower competition keywords. This is a lower one, and it was much easier to show up in there in the exact way that I wanted. They had a bunch. This is one of those examples of a bad result where the output did not make any sense, and so I clarified that in our article. And then next thing you know, I was able to basically get our content to replace what was in there using both a better address of the search intent, but also using the similarity score. At this point, they were like, what are media organization examples? And they had a bunch of random ones that didn't make any sense, like different, it was like news and communities, and I don't know what SGE was thinking. Someone else was relevant in a weird way. Final one was enterprise SEO. I was not able to get into this one, and it's interesting because it's such a high competitive keyword across different SaaS programs, different agencies. So I tried on this one and was not able to. I tried to get in for the actual paragraph definition, continuing to work on this, but it's a lot of testing, seeing if you show up. One day you do, one day you don't, using the SGE similarity. And in theory, you would be able to, but some of these were really well optimized just unintentionally for their similarity score. They probably use tools like ClearScope, Bernard's in here, Market Muse, Phrase, Surfer SEO, all these tools that really help you make sure that your content is useful and relevant for what you're going after, creating these great briefs. So I do want to call out this GEO academic paper from some really smart folks in Princeton and University of Delhi. They went through and looked at what was showing up in large language models. This wasn't specifically for SGE. This was, I believe, for ChatGPT, OpenAI, but they found that doing things like using relevant quotes, using statistics, using authoritative citations were more likely to get you into the output. In addition to that, as Mike mentioned, structured data, I'd recommend putting in FAQ chunks, information gain, which is specifically any content that is incredibly relevant to your search query, but is not covered by anyone else in the, that is trying to rank for it. So information gain is things that are new, things that are relevant, and things that are unique. So think any sort of subject matter expertise content that nobody else really has insights to. Mike, do you want to speak to information gain? Because I hope I didn't butcher it too bad.
No, I think you covered it, but I did want to say on the GEO stuff, in that paper, they walk through the different techniques. You can leave it there where you are. They walked through the different techniques, and effectively what they did is they were able to have a controlled environment where they had I think it might have been Perplexity. I can't remember which tool it was, but they were able to control the documents entirely and then basically make changes. And a couple of things that they did are like your standard SEO things like keyword stuffing. They found that didn't work at all. And in fact, it made things worse as far as appearing in the AI snapshot. But then they tried a whole bunch of other things like citing the sources, adding quotes, adding stats. Even if the stats weren't real, right? It just yielded a better performance. So I would encourage everyone to check out this paper because they really walk through all the different ways to do these optimizations, and then they show what the improvement is based on these different things. So citing the sources saw 132% improvement, adding statistics, 65% improvement, and sounding more authoritative was an 89% improvement. And so another thing with the paper is that they actually did this using ChatGPT, and they gave their prompts, which I show on the next slide, that they actually use. So you could, kind of replicate what they were doing using their prompts, making adjustments yourself to make it more tailored to what it is that you're trying to do, and really scale the approach to optimizing your content using these things.
And so finally, to sum everything up, like ultimately, even though this is scientific, it's an inexact science because we are dealing with a relative black box to some extent when it comes to SGE or any large language models. That's why the best thing that you can do is track what's most important to you, because whether or not you're able to crack this nut and the volatility that it's going to continue to show in and ingest into search or inject into search, being what what's get being able to measure and track and then try to make changes and move along with it is going to put you ahead of the curve. So there's a spreadsheet that kind of gives you a little guidance there. I know we're almost at time, but we're almost at the end. I can stick around for a few questions if any come up at this point. But finally, future of SGE, closing thoughts. There we talked about whether or not users like it, whether or not there's this novelty aspect to it. Like, we're all SEOs, we're all marketers. We all have a certain perspective of when we see this stuff and we use it and we test it out. But like, our parents, our kids, our friends, the local guy that we play rec basketball with, like, how are they using these tools? Whether people are gonna like it or not. I think with the way that ChatGPT has blown a lot of people's minds, if it's put in front of people, I think it's going to be more than a novelty. I don't think people are educated right now in the sense that they don't know it's providing bad information unless it's really obvious. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not it is a novelty. I'm skeptical, but the results are also bad right now. Mike, what are your long-term perspectives on the future?
I don't think it's going to be the default thing forever. I think it'll be, like something that you can click over to and see it and use it if you want. But I think that, again, Google has to make a big splash with it. And so they're going to. But I think they're going to quickly realize that it's like not cost effective. We still don't know what the ad units are really going to look like. So I think it's going to be one of those things that they roll out and they just get rid of over time.
There you go. There you go. Two opposite. I think you're right. I mean, I think ultimately with Google, you always have to think about money, right? You also always have to think about how it's going to impact the bottom line. And we haven't seen a obvious success for revenue at this point. So I think ultimately it's not something that you can ignore, because I think regardless, people are going to continue to fracture the way that they find information. We've seen the Reddit, people going and appending Reddit to their searches. We've seen the outrage on the core update and how forums have jumped to the top. We see people using TikTok more for certain types of searches. TikTok, one thing we need to think about too is the mediums and the modes and the demographics of how people search. Sometimes video and discovery is the best solution. Sometimes, exploration and text and images. It's all really interesting. I think if you do want to, like we mentioned, if you want to get your own SGE report, it is free. Go to that link. I'm pumping it in there. I'm getting the data. I'm trying to get them out there like as quickly as possible if you submit it, but we'd love to have you submit there. And really appreciate everyone coming out. This is a really interesting time for SEO. Everything is going to continue to change. Mike, any parting words for anyone?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much change. There's more change in the last like 18 months in search than I've seen in my entire career in search. And I've been doing this almost 2 decades. So there's a lot of opportunity at the same time as well. And so I would just encourage everyone to really be playing with all the new technologies, testing everything you hear about, and continuing to just share back with the community. We just spent an hour showing you most of what we've learned about SGE. And, it doesn't benefit me to show this to you guys, but I want our community, our industry to continue to level up and share in the same ways that we do. So thanks for listening and looking forward to the things that everyone discovers and shares as well.
Awesome. Yeah, hit us up. Make sure you tag us on Twitter or LinkedIn if you discover anything about SGE, because we're trying. There's so much information. But thanks again, everybody. We will see you, and hit either of us up anywhere on the socials or email or on the website. And if you have any questions, we're always happy to help. Have a great rest of your week, folks.